The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him, and he stayed close to the sea. One of the synagogue officials named Jairus came forward. Seeing him, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him, saying, "My daughter is at the point of death. Please come lay your hands on her, that she may get well and live." He went off with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed upon him. There was a woman afflicted with hemorrhages for 12 years. She had suffered greatly at the hands of many doctors and had spent all that she had. Yet she was not helped, but only grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. She said, "If I but touch his clothes, I shall be cured." Immediately her flow of blood dried up. She felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Jesus, aware at once that power had gone out from him, turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who has touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to Jesus, "You see how the crowd is pressing upon you, and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. The woman, realizing what had happened to her, approached in fear and trembling. She fell down before Jesus and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be cured of your affliction." While he was still speaking, people from the synagogue official's house arrived and said, "Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher any longer?" Disregarding the message that was reported, Jesus said to the synagogue official, "Do not be afraid, just have faith." He did not allow anyone to accompany him inside except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they arrived at the house of the synagogue official, he caught sight of a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. So he went in and said to them, "Why this commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but asleep." And they ridiculed him. Then he put them all out. He took along the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and entered the room where the child was. He took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." The girl, a child of 12, arose immediately and walked around. At that they were utterly astounded. He gave strict orders that no one should know this, and said that she should be given something to eat. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Man, isn't it great to have the choir back? This is so exciting. This is the first Sunday back. Awesome. I love it. I think it's very fitting today, actually, that we have the choir back, because today we're kind of wrapping up this series of homilies I've been giving over the last couple months about why we're Catholic, reasons to be Catholic. Too many of us, we grow up as cradle Catholics, and we never really ask important questions like that. And sometimes when people ask us questions, we kind of struggle to answer. And so I've been spending the last couple of months talking about the beautiful and great things about being Catholic, right? And today, I wanted to talk about beauty, specifically. We've talked about how we know the church is true and that God is real. We know, and we've talked about how the church is good. The church has been a force for the good all throughout world history and continues to be a force for the good today. But the last thing I want to talk about today is the church is beautiful. Catholicism is beautiful, right? I remember I was struck by this. A couple of years ago, I had a friend who had become Catholic, and she was substituting at our parish school, and she was telling the children, most of whom were cradle Catholics, and she was talking about becoming Catholic, and she said, "Becoming Catholic is the greatest thing that has ever happened to me. It's so beautiful being Catholic." And I remember seeing the response of some of the children. In fact, some of them went home and told their parents, "Can you believe that?" She said, "This is the greatest thing that's ever happened to her," right? Many of us as Catholics, especially cradle Catholics, we don't always think about Catholicism as something that is beautiful. And sometimes we can take it for granted, right? It's also important that we recognize that one of the great things about being Catholic is not just that it's beautiful, but that the church proactively cherishes things that are beautiful and promotes them. One of the stories I always think about this, and you may have heard me say this before, but one of my favorite stories about Mother Teresa. As you know, she was lived amongst the poorest of the poor, lived a very ascetical lifestyle. And there was a man who met her in the 80s. He was a person who made documentaries. And so one of the documentaries he was making at the time was he was traveling all around the world, in Europe in particular, and he was making documentaries about the beautiful art museums and the beautiful basilicas and cathedrals that the church had built. And during this time, obviously, he was making quite a bit of money, and he was living pretty luxuriously. And at some point upon his travels, he actually happened to be in the same city as Mother Teresa, and so, of course, she wanted to meet him. And he expected to be rebuked, right? He was very ashamed, right? Imagine meeting Mother Teresa, this very holy person who lives a very ascetical and poor lifestyle, and here he was living this luxurious life. And instead of being rebuked by Mother Teresa, she thanked him. She said, "In our world, there are many forms of poverty. But one of the greatest forms of poverty in our culture today is a poverty of beauty." Poverty of beauty. And so she thanked him. Right? And isn't that true? Isn't it true that there is a poverty of beauty in our culture today, right? Except for today, because we have Gunnar back with us, right? Very beautiful little child, right? Great to have him. What does the poverty of beauty look like? And one of the things I think is kind of ironic about our culture today, that one of the ways you see this, especially here in the United States of America, right? We are amongst the healthiest, wealthiest, most successful people in the world, and yet, more and more cases of anxiety, of suicide, of depression, it's all rising, right? Even though materially speaking, we have everything we could possibly need, spiritually, we are becoming more and more sick and poor. It's because of a poverty of beauty. Because at the end of the day, this is something that we don't always realize. Beauty gives life to us in a way that material needs can't. Sometimes, even when we are deprived of material needs, if we are captivated by something that is beautiful, it literally breathes life into us and it keeps us alive, right? One of the concrete examples of this, many of you are parents, right? Oftentimes, once you have a child, right, you're not able to sleep. Oftentimes, your meals get interrupted. You don't have a chance to rest. And yet, do you feel any less alive as a parent? No, you're captivated by this new life that has entered into your family, and it breathes new life into you. Right? Or think about maybe the time that you first fell in love, right? And the kind of new life that surges into your spirit, right? And you'll do all sorts of crazy things for someone when you're in love, when you're enamored by their beauty, right? I remember, for example, one of the great influences on my faith were some of the beautiful girls in my youth group, right? One of the reasons why I started going to daily mass when I was in high school, because I had a really beautiful classmate who was going to daily mass, right? I wanted to join her, right? Beauty gives life to us, and beauty is the greatest gift that we have as human beings. And in our culture, we are experiencing a poverty of beauty. And some of the ways this manifests itself. I think one of the ways it manifests itself most particularly today in our culture is we have a culture that is way too busy. Way too busy. And we no longer have time to just simply enjoy beautiful things. I was really edified a couple of weeks ago. I heard about a man in Carmel, at Our Lady Mount Carmel, and he has this tradition with his 6 kids. Is every single night, no matter what's going on during the day, no matter what the weather is like, every single night he goes for a walk with one of his children. Right? He sets aside a half hour to go for a walk. And on the 7th day, he goes for a walk with his wife. Right? How many of us intentionally take the time to do things like that? Focus on what is truly beautiful. How many of us take the time to watch a sunset or listen to a beautiful piece of music? Many of us are entirely too busy and therefore we don't actually have time to pay attention to what is truly beautiful. And it sucks the life out of us. We're too busy in our culture today. Another way we see a poverty of beauty in our culture. One of the most characteristic traits of modernity, which I despise, right? Full disclosure here, many great things about modernity. One of the things I despise about our modern culture today is that we don't defend beautiful things. In our modern culture today, there's this antithesis against the past, against great traditions, about things that we have held dear. And in our modern culture today, so often those things are up for grabs. People are tearing them down. Things that used to be sacred, things that used to be objective, people are now manipulating, tearing down. Right? It's one of the things that worries me about when people speak about the history of our country, for example. Sure, there are plenty of sins that we have committed as a nation, but there's also a lot of beautiful things that we've done. And we need to spend less time critiquing and criticizing and tearing down, and more times appreciating what is good. Right? Even in different aspects of our culture, things like music and art. And I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings here, but I would suggest to you that when you compare some of the beautiful art of the past and some of the modern art of today, is there really a comparison? Right? We don't defend beauty enough in our culture. We see that with human dignity. Do we defend the rights of unborn children? Do we defend human sexuality and all the beautiful nature of it that the church has always taught? Do we defend it? Right? It's very important for us to remember as human beings, and this is what I despise about modernity. It is so much easier to tear something down than it is to build something up and preserve things that are beautiful. That's why every human being, and especially for us as Catholics, all of us should, in that sense of the word, we should all be conservatives, and not conservative politically. Conservative in the sense that we see that it is so much harder to build something and preserve something than it is to tear something down. And so we should always be striving to conserve, to preserve, to defend that which is good and that which is beautiful. And thanks be to God, we are part of a church that cherishes what is good, that cherishes what is beautiful. So many of the great works of art in world history were funded by the church. So many of the greatest artists, authors, musicians were devout Catholics. Right? We cherish beauty. Even when it comes to the Mass and the liturgy, right? We put a strong emphasis on making it beautiful. Because technically speaking, I could be up here in street clothes. I don't need to have nice vestments. Technically, when it comes to the Mass, we really don't need incense. We don't need cassocks and surplices. We don't need songs. But why do we do it? Because we want to make something that is beautiful. And we want that beauty to refill our souls. Right? Why do we go all out at the Mass? Because we want to do something that's beautiful for God, because we love God. Why do we sing happy birthday at birthday parties instead of just saying it? Right? Because it makes more beautiful, more joyous. And so you've probably noticed that even here at St. Bernard, I like to go all out with the Mass. And it's not just because it's a preference I have, it's because it's what we should all be doing. We need to resist the temptation in our modern culture to treat the Mass as just something to be used. We need to treat it as the most important thing that we do all day long and make it as beautiful as we possibly can. I learned this from, actually, St. John Vianney, one of the great saints of the church. He was a man who lived in utter poverty. The only thing he ever ate every day was potatoes because he lived such extreme asceticism. But when it came to the Mass, he was extravagant with what he spent on the Mass, on the vestments, on the candles, the incense. He spent everything because God deserves the best of what we have. I'm so grateful in our church. We cherish beauty. By so doing, we are giving to our culture and to our souls the medicine that we need more than anything else. That so often is being lost and deprived in our culture.